What is up, family? You are listening to Living Beyond the Dream podcast, where we're having practical conversations to take the dreams you have for yourself and your church and turn them into a reality. My name is Mike. Join my man Tyler, like we are every single week. Again, we like to start off by just giving you guys some thanks and some love because you've been giving us some podcast love by sharing it and subscribing and tuning in and writing reviews. Thank you. If you haven't already, and please do that. It really helps us get our reach out. So if you ever have an episode that really just kind of means something to you, give a share out, write a review. Let us know, man. We'd love to hear in the comments section anything that's really kind of been a blessing to you. Yeah. And Tyler, I'm excited about what we're going to talk about today because it's one of those topics that aren't necessarily flashy, but are drastically important for you too. So if you hear the title and you kind of might want to go, I don't know, because we always think so. This is really, really important for your leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all encompassing, right? So this week we're going to talk about a topic that is really close to home here. I've seen both sides of this coin, but we're going to be diving into if family suffers, everything suffers.
Come on.
So maybe if you could just start out by, what does that mean?
Well, here's the thing, and this is why I say it's not really that flashy, because as leaders, we're so geared on growth.
Yeah.
Right, in our organization and growth and how we can be better leaders and all this stuff. That's all we want to focus on. We only want to read those books. We only want to hear those podcasts. We want those. Give me the how-tos to move the ball forward in my organization and in my leadership. The problem is if your family life is suffering, no matter how you try to move forward, it's like you are chained to something that's going to hold you back.
Yeah.
No matter how many steps forward you get, that sooner or later that chain's going to get taut and you ain't going anywhere, because if your family's suffering and they're not going with you, you can't go alone without separating from your family.
Yeah.
So you're either going to be stuck or you're going to end up causing a disconnection completely in your family. So that's why if your family's suffering, everything else in your life is going to suffer. So this may not be one of those how-to sexy podcasts that you want to hear, but it is drastically important for the success of your leadership, but of your entire life.
That's good. So let's dive in.
Okay. Let's do it.
How important is a supportive spouse?
Here's what I always tell leaders. If your spouse isn't bought in, you're not in the right season of your life. You're not ready to move forward.
Yeah.
You've got to do this thing called ministry, especially with a supported house, because there's a lot that goes into leading a church. In ministry. We're in the trenches with people. We're dealing with not just having people that attend our business. We literally are in with life with people, trying to see them grow in their marriages and in their finances and in their parenting and in their jobs and in them being spiritually growing. And if you don't have a supportive spouse that's there with you, when you're going through all this, it's going to be hard and draining, and you're going to feel like you're in this thing all alone, and there's going to be this disconnection. So you have to know that your spouse is supportive of your calling and you're supportive of their calling, and you guys are in this together. You're partners in this together. So you have to have a supportive spouse from day one. And I've had moments in my life where my wife, I've wanted to pursue ministry at a certain church, or I wanted to pursue a certain area, and my wife has told me no. She didn't feel it. She had the discernment, and I had to accept that. I had to feel like, you know what? I know that God's going to imply that on her heart when it's our timing. And now looking back in hindsight, she was right. We weren't ready in our relationship. It wasn't the right place or timing, and it wasn't the calling of God. And I needed my wife who didn't have the eager eyes, but had the family health eyes looking in on the situation and realize it. And then when we went to plant the church, we were both 100% bought in. And it was the hardest days we ever had. We had some of the hardest times planting this church. It is hard planting a church. There's nothing more difficult. And if I didn't have my wife beside me supporting me, I would have never made it. I would have never made it. But the fact that I knew I wasn't in this fight alone and we were in this together gave us the strength to push through.
Well, and I want to talk about that for a second. You actually have a very unique scenario that you are in full-time ministry with your wife.
That's right.
I mean, you are the lead pastor. She is over the campus pastors. So can you talk about that relationship to the people that are working with their spouses? What does that look like? And I know this is kind of broad, but what does that look like does it affect your work ethic, and then how does it affect your family time?
Yeah, there is definitely this understanding of respect and love that has to go into it, especially when we're leading together.
Yeah.
And I'm the lead pastor. She's the campus pastor. I know some spouses, they're both the lead pastor. However, my wife is a co-founding pastor with me. So she's there, but there are vision decisions I make and culture decisions I make that she definitely has to come up underneath me and really agree with that. So there has to be this love and respect that I give her. I respect her and love her and not domineering. So there is a balance you've got to learn to work with your spouse, but it's also the support system that we understand that I fully trust my wife.
Yeah.
So I don't have to micromanage her area. Yeah. I've empowered her. I believe in her.
That's good.
She's amazing at what she does. She's a phenomenal leader. And so we have a trust level there that we've built over the years where we have this kind of camaraderie. Now, here's what we also have to be careful. We don't live our church life 24/7.
Yeah.
We can't always be just staff members of a church every facet of our life. Yeah. We have to learn that we have to leave sometimes the church at the office and be a family, right? Yeah. And when you're both doing the same job and you're both extremely passionate about it and you love it and it is your life, it's easy to consume every single aspect of your life. So you've got to learn the balance of that. So I've learned that we've got to learn to love each other. We've got to respect each other. We've got to trust each other. And we've got to learn to have balance in our life. Those are all really important aspects of what we do. Now, can I key on this real quick? Because I want to backtrack just a second.
Do it.
And this wasn't planned. But I've also learned to work with my wife when she had a full calling to be in ministry, yet I was full-time paid at the church and she wasn't.
Yeah.
And she had to work a job outside of the church to support us financially. And there's a huge balancing act there because my wife has been called to be a leader and a pastor in our church. She has been called to help. She's founded the church with me. She worked just as hard as I did a lot of times, but while working another job outside of me working full-time in the church. And there's this understanding we had to come into where I had to learn to love her through that, respect her through that, keep her informed, and also let her also be okay with the season we're in. And my wife had to learn on her end how to be patient with the season, knowing we're building something together, and sooner or later the harvest would come. And so we had to learn the communication in the midst of that. We had to learn the support system in that. I had to not fix my wife all the time whenever she was frustrated and support her. She had to learn to champion me and celebrate me when I was doing things. And so there's this selfless act of when you're doing ministry together as a spouse, can we be selfless together, support and love each other? Because we are not competing. We're not individuals. We are one marriage unit. And when you understand that, there's a support and health. When you don't, you're going to be at pools of each other. And you're going to drain and tear each other apart. You got to learn that balancing act with those two.
I think you hit on something that's so important, and it's keeping your spouse informed in that season where you might not be at the same place. What are some best practices to do that?
Well, here's, especially with guys, speak some dudes real quick. We are the worst with details.
Amen.
The absolute worst with it. So details are not what we think, right? Have you ever had a meeting with somebody and then your wife goes, tell me about the meeting? You go, it went good. Well, how are they doing? They're doing pretty good. No, that's not what she wants to hear.
Right.
She wants to know the juicy deets, right? She wants to know specifics, like what'd you talk about? How did it go? What's going on in their life? What did they have for breakfast, right? And how did they order their eggs? Like they want to know all the juicy deets, and us guys aren't good at that. But if you actually read the Song of Solomon, right? Solomon gives you the key on speaking to ladies, right? If you notice this, right? He goes, ooh, girl, your neck is like an ivory tower, right? It's like twin fawns, like they got to be identical. Apparently to Solomon, he got preferences, right? He's all like, what's he doing? He's all about the details, right? He is like, man, I'm going to speak the details in this situation because ladies like details. So in your marriage and in your workplace, you need to make sure you are keeping up with the details to fill your spouse in to the point where sometimes they're like, okay, I don't care. Because if they get to the point where like you've overshared like a little bit, like, I'm just not really care about all that. You've done your job because they feel like they're a part as much as they can be, all right? They know they're not fully there, but they feel like they're up to date as much as can be.
Yeah.
And John Maxwell had a kind of a statement. He said he used to every day would write down, because he traveled, did leadership. I heard somebody speak on this, that he would write on a postcard every detail about a meeting he had or everything he did that day. And at night he would call his spouse and he would tell her everything he did that day.
Yeah.
So she always felt up to date, to the point where sometimes she'd be like, I don't care. Or like, you don't have to tell me. Oh, it's great. But it's the fact that we need to make sure, because guys are the worst at details.
That's good. Talk to me about some warning signs.
Okay.
Like, what are some warning signs that, might signal that you are getting into an unhealthy season with your spouse, and that it might get to that point where it's affecting everything?
Well, if I can be vulnerable and honest, I remember at one point, and this might not be a warning sign, this is probably when all the alarms are firing off, but my wife at one point, basically in the middle, I remember exactly where we're sitting, living room, she is sobbing, crying, and she tells me, "You love the church more than you love me and the children." And I remember getting really mad, right? Yeah. And I get all defensive, because that's what we as people do, right? Because if you ever say anything negative against you as a person, you're like, no, I don't, right? And I'm like, I do not. And she's like, yes, you do. She says, you spend 7 days of the week, 24/7, only focusing on the church. Yeah. And you don't even think about us. And at this point, I was working full-time and trying to plant the church. And I remember yelling at her, and I remember going off. I go, what else do you expect me to do? You see that I work 24/7, and I still can't get it all done. And I'm working to support the family, and I'm working to plant this church, and I'm going off on her. And what she was just basically saying is, we are not a priority to you. And she was right. She wasn't a priority to me. The church wasn't my first priority. Yeah. Actually, the church was probably more of a priority to me than God was, because it literally took every winking moment. Yeah. So the question you have to ask yourself is, who is your number one priority? Yeah. And God should be first, but your wife should be second. Yeah. Like, no ifs, ands, or buts. Yeah. And I don't care about this excuse, you don't have enough time. Because I realize that you have more time than what you really think you do. But when we give our excuse that we can work anytime, we will literally procrastinate or not work as efficient as we should. Yeah. I heard Craig Rochelle say it like this one time. He goes, have you ever noticed that whenever you know you're going to leave on vacation and you're going to have an early weekend, right? You're going to leave Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So you're not even going to go to work on Friday. You tend to get done in 4 days what normally takes you 5 days. Yeah. Because you're gone Friday. Yeah. He goes, we are actually more efficient when we have deadlines in our life. Huh. Well, the same is true in your life. Yeah. As a pastor, you don't put deadlines. You don't put limits. So then you think you're busy because you're really just not as efficient as you should be. But if you say, these are sacred moments, when I go home, it's off. Yeah. Like, I'm not doing church work. It's sacred. You're going to work a lot harder 8 to 5. Yeah. When you say a certain day is off limits, you're going to work a lot harder so that that day is still off limits. Yeah. And what you've got to learn is, what is your priorities? Yes. And if you don't set those limits and those governors in your personal life, you are always going to throttle yourself to exhaustion. Yeah. And your spouse and your children will always come less. Yeah. So you need to sit back and really be honest about evaluating your schedule and your weeks and seeing, am I making my spouse a priority? That's the biggest warning sign. Yeah. Because if you can make your spouse a priority, I promise you, a lot of the other things are going to fall in line in health. But if you start seeing a lot of things coming out of balance, it's mainly because the priorities are out of balance.
Yeah. Well, and thanks for sharing that story. I mean, that's that vulnerability, I feel like is a very easy place to fall into when you are kickstarting something, and so that's incredible.
Well, and let me say this. We excuse what we do because we think we're doing good things. Yeah. So we will excuse unhealthy behaviors because we'll say we're doing it for the cause of Christ. Yeah. Listen to me very clearly. That's the manipulation of the devil. What's it say? The devil hides himself as an angel of light. And so some of these great things that you're doing for the cause of Christ, if it's at the detriment of your family, you better believe that's not of God. Yeah. Come on. And it's not to say that your church isn't of God. It's to say the way you're doing it is not of God.
Yeah.
And you need to make sure you don't let that manipulation keep you from what matters. Because listen to me very clearly. I don't care how great your church is. If your children resent you and God because you never gave them any time, ain't going to matter.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ain't going to matter.
So true.
And you can't get that back.
Yeah.
So make sure your priorities are right.
That's good. Let's talk about those priorities. You talked about just being able to turn it off and making sure that you are fully devoted in that time to your spouse or your kids or something like that. So how do you prioritize like date days or kid time?
Yes.
What are some best practices?
Well,
there?
here's the reality is that I always say here's the reality, right?
Here's the reality.
It is the reality. And if you don't think my opinions are not the reality, then you just need to go to another podcast. Well, here is my opinion, okay? The fact of the matter is this. If you are always working, you're not leading very well.
Yeah.
And I say this to my staff all the time. If your phone's blowing up, you're not leading very well.
Yeah.
Because you have to make every decision and fix every problem, and you're the one that has to do everything, and you are not empowering enough people.
Yeah.
So if your nights are always booked, and your phone is always blowing up, and you can't spend family time, and you can't ever date your spouse, that is only a conversation you need to have with yourself and look in the mirror and say, am I empowering enough people?
Yeah.
So you have to learn to lead better. Mm-hmm. And that may sound like, oh my goodness. And people think, well, how can you say that? Listen to me. We're a church pushing 2,000 people. We're a church that's literally launching our second location.
Yeah.
And we literally have barely over a handful of full-time paid staff members.
Yeah.
The rest of our church is ran by amazing volunteers that work full-time jobs outside of and serve our church.
Yeah.
But we empower, we encourage, we invest in them, we love them, we are building up leaders. So you may be a church of 50, 75 people and say, well, I can't afford no full-time staff. That's not the excuse.
Right.
It's the empowerment and the leadership that you've got to learn in your spirit, because buying help will never solve your problem.
Yeah.
Equipping people and investing in people and seeing value in people will always solve the problem, because you're going to learn to duplicate and multiply your impact. And that's going to give you sacred nights.
Yep.
That's going to give you date times.
Yeah.
It's going to give you that free space that you're not always having to do everything.
Yeah, that's good. And I want to talk about the staff part of this real quick. You know, as a leader, it is our job to keep a pulse on how our staff is doing. And so I want to camp out here, and we'll end on this as well. But in regards to the staff, if you see someone struggling in this area, it's a very sensitive topic. So how do you go about calling it out?
Well, it's not calling it out. It's always a constant pulse. Like, here's the thing that you've got to understand. We're in ministry.
Yeah.
We're not just a Fortune 500 company, okay? Like, your personal life matters to us because your spiritual life is the most important thing.
Yeah.
So if we're not ministering and pouring into our staff members, we're in the wrong business.
Yeah.
So it should be always what we keep on a pulse on. How are you? Are you dating your spouse? Are you having kid time? How is your schedule? Like, those are just always what we're keeping a pulse on it always. Yeah. So it's not this big call out. It's that we understand when there's a 1 degree separation, we're going to adjust it when it's small instead of wait till it's big.
Yeah.
And that's in every area, right? If you wait till something's monumental, it's always harder to deal with, right? Like, so anything you have to confront, it's always easier to catch the fire at the match than it is when it's a forest fire.
Yeah.
So we've got to always be on the pulse of where people are relationally and spiritually in their personal lives, because we care about them. Mm-hmm. And we're ministering to them just as much as we're ministering to the people in our church on a Sunday.
Yeah.
So when you're having your campus pastors or your staff developers, as they're meeting on a regular basis with the staff, that should always be what we're thinking about.
Yeah.
And having a conversation. I literally just met with one of our campus pastors today. And literally the first 20, 30 minutes of the meeting was me asking about their personal life.
Yeah.
Never even got into church business until I started listening to their personal life, right? Yeah. I had an hour blocked out with them, and I took half of that time to care about their personal life.
Yeah.
Before I ever got into business.
That's good.
Because that's what's most important.
Yeah.
So you need to take that value and really care about that first.
Come on. So powerful.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, guys, we are so glad you tuned in. Another episode in the books.
Yes.
And if you are new to this podcast, make sure you subscribe. You're watching us on YouTube. Not only subscribe, ring and ding that bell. You never miss an episode. Share it, rate it, and review it. And until next week, we pray God's peace.